Hi, everyone. It's Christy Maxfield with Purpose First Advisors and Dr. Donna Marino here to talk with you about the second topic in our series about grief in the workplace, particularly in family businesses and founder-led businesses. And so we're so glad you could join us for this conversation. Our first conversation really sparked a lot of interest because it's not a topic that is commonly covered. And we had a few people reach out to us and really appreciate the fact that we were talking about something that there's not a lot of resources or other information on. So Donna, I know that was gratifying for both of us.
Yes, definitely. And really, until you and I started talking, Christy, I really hadn't heard anybody use the word grief in relation to family business. And yet it shows up in many different ways, as we talked about last time and our future segments, that it's not just succession transition and it's not just the loss of the generation before you, but employee issues, which we'll be talking about another time. But I think as a society, we don't talk about grief. So it was unique of us to talk about it, and people seem to really appreciate it.
Indeed. And so we're really glad if you're joining us again, either live or on a replay, to explore this topic with us. Today, we're specifically focusing in on grief as a potential barrier to succession planning and what it means. I think, Donna, I see it kind of from two perspectives. One, you're the person who is in the seat that is transitioning. Either you've decided to sell or you've decided to step aside and let a member of your family take over or a different partner take over, or you're kind of forced into that decision for some reason or another. And you're grappling with the grief yourself. And so what does it mean for you, and managing those feelings and understanding how that can impact your decision making? And then there's those of us who might have been raised in family businesses like you and me, where someone either really does need to make a transition for a whole lot of reasons that are in everyone's best interest, including theirs, and they're very reluctant to do so, or they've actually said it's time for me to make the transition, but they're not moving, they're not moving, they're not actually transitioning. So I think there's like two sides of the coin. If you're the person who's waiting for that person to transition and can better understand the grief that they might be experiencing and not even able to name, or if you're the person who's struggling with what you think is the obvious next step in your business, but you can't seem to take it, maybe this will help you understand those feelings in a different framework. And it's not just that you're procrastinating or you're lazy or you're stubborn, but that there's really some profound things going on right now. And we want to help you explore those as well.
Yeah. And it's so interesting, Christy, because this very topic came up this morning for me in conversation, and both sides of it, right? We have people who say they're retired and show up at the business every day still, and people who, at 87 have not left the business. And it's both sides, like, hey, it's time for them to move on, or they said they moved on, but they're here every day. And one of the things we talked about is how both sides can help in that preparation. It's not just the generation or person leaving, but it's the people coming in that can help that person as well.
And when your experience, as you might all recall, this is Donna's specialty in terms of working with family businesses and the different combinations of family members who can be involved in business, so generational differences as well as familial differences. Do you find that both sides of the table are able to come and have a conversation together when you're engaged, or are you typically helping one side of the relationship figure out how to bring this topic up and address it in ways that maybe would be more effective than they did before?
Typically, I first come in and work with either side one-on-one. So getting this person's feel and take on things and this person's feel and take on things, and helping each side individually, but then bringing them all together to have the conversation together. I know you see this with exit planning. People look at the legal and the financial and, all of those pieces, but often neglect the emotional piece. And when you have someone leaving who's been there and raised this business, and now even if they want to exit, it's like, who am I? What am I going to do with my time? Can I step away? Will this next gen be able to handle it? All of these questions that can keep them stuck, even if they want to go. And then there's that generation that wants to take the reins and is struggling with, this person won't leave, or I want to do it in my way, and all those struggles. But they can also help the person who wants to leave, that previous generation, make the transition by supporting them emotionally and helping them with those decision making and openly discussing expectations and fears.
Openly discussing expectations and fears. That's probably our t-shirt. Please,
right.
like maybe on the back of the shirt it says, "Please come talk to me," and on the front it says,
"I love it. I love it." Little marketing.
To have open dialogue about expectations and fears, because I think that's true on both sides. And I think it's amazing that in working individually with the different folks in these relationships, because they're often familial relationships, parent and child, siblings, uncles and aunts and nieces and nephews. There's the dynamic of however they experience each other as family members, and there's the dynamic of how they experience each other as business people. And I would imagine those are often intertwined and sometimes not easily separated.
Yeah.
Because if I was the kid who tripped over my own shoelaces as a kid, and you remember that, and now you're like, I'm gonna let you run XYZ. It's sometimes hard to get our own cast typing out of our head when we're having these conversations. When they finally come together and do move from one-on-one to face-to-face, how does that usually play out? Because I could imagine there's a lot of trepidation on both sides.
Yeah, there definitely is. And that's why you need to do the individual work first to really prepare them for those conversations. They have to have enough self-awareness and other awareness to have the conversation successfully. So there are people that enter and they still have their doubts. My dad is never going to leave. I don't care what you say. Or, they can be really nervous, right? Nobody, I have my podcast, Courageous Conflict, and nobody truly enjoys conflict. Some people are more comfortable with it than others. But they know they're going to get into an emotional conversation. When emotions run high, conflict can happen. And so, the trepidation is normal. And that's why you have to really lay the foundation, really set an agenda so there aren't so many uncertainties. Like, these are the things we want to talk about for these outcomes, and always anchoring back into, we want the same thing. We want this company to be successful. We want to pass it on for generations, or we want to sell it at a lot of money, right? And so people do want the business to survive and be successful. So how do we have the conversation that makes the smoothest transition? And as you said, both for the company, but also for the family, that people feel good about what happened. And in that conversation, correcting, I love the word you use, cast typing, like seeing that 30-year-old in front of you instead of that 12-year-old.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we definitely, I feel like it's more cast typing than stereotyping sometimes when it comes to our own family, because we play these roles and they really do assume that we're either capable of doing things that we may or may not be capable of, or incapable of doing things we may or may not be. And I think you touched on briefly just the ability of the next generation, concerns about wanting the business to stay in the family, but not knowing if specific family members have the skill and acumen to take on that role. I'm sure that comes up a lot.
Absolutely. And it's a very true fear, and can be true in that there is no one yet who's ready for this role, who knows enough about the business, or about business in general. Sometimes then comes the really challenging conversation of, do we bring in an interim non-family member CEO? And that has its own concerns and fears. So there's a lot of conversations that need to happen. And like something like that, bringing in a non-family member to steer the ship, emotions are very high then. And people may not be able to leave at that point because of that fear. And the next generation may be thinking, I'm never going to get a chance at this.
Sure.
There's those two sides again. Even, maybe that parent or head of the company now is like, no, I'm leaving. And if you're not ready, I'm going to bring this person in, and maybe they're comfortable with it. But that next gen feels slighted now and doesn't.
For sure.
Right. It's family business is complex, right? Family relationships in general are complex. Nobody has as much history with you as your family.
No, they do not.
Right. And then you add business and lifestyle and, future earnings. It's a lot.
100%. This is where I start to think it's really helpful for business owners to think of succession planning separate from exit planning. Because the succession process is actually about talent management and talent development. People call me all the time and say, it's time to talk about succession. But they haven't actually prepared any successors. And the conversation about succession is about, who are your potential successors? Who's performing at a high level now, and who is exhibiting potential to grow into a role you want them to grow into? And then what are you going to do to be intentional about helping them grow into that role? And that happens in family businesses, nonprofits, privately held, but managerial run businesses. We're not really good. We worry about retention. We worry about recruitment. We worry about performance in the present tense, but we're not very good at identifying potential and then being very intentional about bringing that person to a place where they can assume new roles. And I think it's normal to be concerned about somebody's ability to perform, especially since the first thing that's probably qualifying them is that they're biologically related to you. Right? I think at that point, I might even recommend being a little bit more thoughtful in my assessment of their abilities for the role they want and the role that I need them in. But I think succession planning as its own process of developing people and identifying the strengths and weaknesses and creating environments where people can practice and make mistakes before the stakes are too high. Is part of that process.
Yeah, for sure. I love how you separated that out between succession and exit planning. And that is one thing I see with family businesses is they often they don't start early enough with thinking about, how are we going to prepare the next gen, giving them enough information even to decide if this is what they want or not. But that mentorship, training, what are the guidelines? Does somebody have to be of a certain age to be able to join the board or the company? Do they have to work outside the company first? And oftentimes people don't think about these things until it's time to go, right? And thinking about that from the get-go of how do we create these experiences to get people ready is really important, and acknowledging and being honest over people's strengths and weaknesses. Just because you're
Yes.
the firstborn son or nephew doesn't mean that you are actually the right person for that role. And maybe you should be heading up the sales department instead of CEO. There's a lot of things to consider, and the family ties, the bloodline, can make the waters a lot more murky. So, yeah.
Yes, indeed. I think of even scenarios where that firstborn doesn't even work in the business, but
Mhm,
someone else, either a sibling or a niece or cousin, I should say,
mhm.
is working in the business. And even just the unspoken expectations of, I've put in sweat equity, this person hasn't been here. What am I entitled to? What are they entitled to? What's fair?
Yeah,
I mean, these are all things that people have opinions about, even if they're not sharing them with each other,
yeah, yeah.
and perspectives on.
Mhm.
Uh,
Kind of what you're saying, that, a situation where the non-family members are really the ones working with the owner and growing that company now, and their question is, so if the owner's children decide they want to be a part of this company, like, what happens to me and my growth? And do they just leapfrog me when they've never worked in the business? And a lot of conversations need to happen even outside the family, right? With the people
for
who have
sure.
put in that sweat equity.
Which is why having a very clear talent management strategy where everyone in the organization is aware of what it takes to be eligible, to be considered for certain roles, and then how you demonstrate your readiness for those roles, and then what criteria is being used to evaluate, putting aside biological ties. When we're
Mhm.
looking at this role and what this role requires, and how we're evaluating everyone, regardless of who they might be related to, and having candid conversations as part of that. If that's part of the culture, I mean, a lot of things we just talked about are, in fact, part of both family culture and business culture.
Yeah.
And they don't happen instantaneously. They certainly don't happen when the founder is 86 years
Years old.
old and has now decided, it's time to have the conversation, or is being pushed to have this conversation. So, um, I think really embedding in your culture an approach to talent management that recognizes that, yes, there are some people in this company who will get a little bit more attention, perhaps, or leeway, because they are familial ties, but that the performance expectations do not vary based on who you're related to. And that's really hard.
Mhm.
I'm not saying it's easy, but I do find if there's a transparent process for how we hire, recruit, train, retain, and elevate staff, then we should all be held to the same standards in that regard.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah,
Exactly. And it's a lot easier to be objective if you are having these conversations early and proactively, before you're like, "Oh, well, I want my son to take the reins," and then trying to say, "Oh, what are the expectations? You have to have a master's level degree or this much experience." Well, he doesn't, so we're going to make the exception.
right.
If right, and then there's hurt feelings, and then you can avoid a lot of that conflict and the hurt feelings and the favoritism if you outline objective expectations, requirements before you end up in the situation. Then it's not
Yeah.
personal.
And this, we've kind of gone deep into how we can navigate different parts of that transfer of roles and responsibilities. Coming back to how grief can impede that process.
Mhm. Mhm.
And do you find yourself having explicit conversations with the founder, the patriarch or matriarch who is the head of the company, about what, and even frame their feelings in terms of grief? Do you find yourself using
Absolutely.
that word? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, a situation that I was brought into was the patriarch and him not understanding like how he was feeling at the time and feeling about the business. And it was out of character for him. And as we explored, it was discovering that, hey, I want to leave. I want to do something else, but I'm afraid that my family could be hurt during this process. I'm afraid, are the kids really ready for this? Just all of this. And then, like, what am I going to do? My wife's worried about what I'm going to do and that I'm going to be home so much. And, who am I without this business? It's been my life for so long. So all these conflicting pieces and identity. It's like I always come back
Yes.
to that because you kind of, especially in this country, when we introduce ourselves, the next question is, what do you do? Right. And
Yes.
so this has been who you are for so long. And part of you wants to leave, but part of you doesn't even recognize yourself without your business. And so before you leave, start exploring again, had you used to spend your time? What hobbies did you like? What do you find mentally engaging? Because you're talking about really smart, strategic,
Yes.
problem solving people. They need a place to target all of that energy, all of that intelligence. So we'll start talking about, are you interested in board positions? Are you interested in mentoring people maybe outside the business,
Mm-hmm.
becoming a member of SCORE and mentoring other entrepreneurs? What are the things that you like to do and how can you stay mentally active? And there has to be kind of a plan in place first. And you use the word structure before. How's my life going to be structured now? The percentage of people who become depressed in retirement is very high.
Very high.
And then you often see people going back to work as well. And in a family business, that can mean really disrupting the business and coming in, and I hate to use the word meddling, but it's
Random acts of management start to
yeah. Oh, I
occur.
love that. I love that. Yeah, and you'll sometimes see this like pop in, stir the pot, leave, pop in, stir, and that can happen too.
Yeah.
So preparing that person for the, like, you are grieving a loss of what you built, of who you thought you were, all these pieces. And so how can you start going through that process even early or in a more helpful way? And also a mindset of, this is why I want to jump back in, and that's not the healthiest thing for the kids, for the business, for
Yeah.
myself, but it's because I'm grieving that loss.
Yes.
So having like sort of a way of understanding it and a box to put it in.
Couldn't agree more. I think that the older owners who I meet with, whose strategy they will tell you explicitly was to work forever or to die at my desk. And they're not kidding, right?
Yeah.
And so much of that was tied to the idea that I won't have meaning and purpose. I don't see how I would have meaning and purpose outside of doing this. And yes, they love what they do. We ostensibly, I hope everyone loves what they do. But we actually get to a point where we're less interested in doing some parts of it.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to do as much or work as hard or in the same way as we used to. We may not be physically or cognitively able to do it in the same way. So there's a lot to come to terms with as well, because this transition is typically happening, at least for older generations, when there's other life changes, other transitions that mark a limit, what might be perceived as a limitation, right, in their mobility, in their ability to be engaged. And then I see younger owners who know for sure they don't want to die at their desk. They don't want to work forever, but they too want to have support in understanding how to create identity and purpose outside this business, which is, for the most part, aside from their family, the most all-consuming thing they do.
Yes, definitely. You know, it's again that grief on both sides, especially something that I'm seeing a lot right now, which is sad, is with increased rates of dementia and Alzheimer's and people not wanting to leave the company and die at their desk, and they don't recognize the cognitive decline, but that next generation is, and the grief there that the former
Oh, wow.
person they knew is not the same, and the grief of like, how do I even approach this topic with someone I love so much? And there could be grief even in them taking on that role, right? Because maybe they, just the reasons they're taking it on, they wanted it to be because that person retired and was living a fabulous life, not because of health reasons.
Yep.
And that complexity, that's another place where you really, as much as possible, want to set standards in place that help with objectivity and make it feel less personal, because those conversations are emotional and really hard, on both sides.
They are. And I think even having the conversation with yourself that I'm not sure who I am without this business can sometimes feel like a failure, that
Mm,
I didn't do something. Or I did something wrong because I don't have an answer to what else would I do. Um, and so I often work with clients to help them think about how their present tense, the way they run their business in the present tense, needs to reflect the different facets of their life, and to be intentional about having friends outside of the industry they work in, having friends outside of business and networking circles, making those time for vacation, having hobbies, cultivating friendships, being involved in the community or in their faith community. Um, that those aren't the things that wait until you retire,
mhm.
and that retirement, there, we haven't come up with a better word yet, but I think most of the owners I work with are in agreement that they don't want to stop working.
Mhm.
They just want to work in different ways, either in their business or in other parts of their life.
Right.
And so, not some of it, I think, is grappling with having the language to describe that I don't want to work here in this way anymore, but I do want to do something that is that looks and seems like it walks like a job, and it talks like a job, and it it looks like a job, and it looks like work, but it's
Mm,
not the same thing that I've been experiencing
mhm,
here. Because here is usually running them ragged, burning them out,
mhm,
doing something that they're like, I'm working really hard to get to the next side of that, where
mhm.
life gets easier, where it's not
Yeah.
so hard,
Mhm.
and where I can do some of the things I enjoy in addition to owning my business.
Yeah. That's
So do
where
you
I see board work coming in, whether it's your favorite nonprofit or a different business, somebody else's business, and being able to feel your experience and career is valued, and being able to light up those parts of your brain, but having, being out of the day to day and having more flexibility in your life. Those can be great ways to keep that part of you alive and sparky, but not have to work in your business day to day.
And again, it precedes what we might consider a traditional exit, in that I've sold the company or I've transferred ownership of the company to someone. That you could be experimenting with working less in your business, being less tied to your role in your business long before you ever change your ownership
Yes.
relationship to your business. Because I also think that most of us never really consider that this business could run without me and take care of me financially in the way I've been accustomed to.
Hmm.
And I don't have to be there every day.
Right. Right.
Kind of like, right? It's like,
And if you
what?
do have to be there every day, then you have created a business that can't have succession or sale because it can't,
Correct.
right? It can't exist without you.
Correct.
So, I mean, that's a problem. And that's often a great way to motivate people
Ah,
and release some of that fear. You know, if you look at it from that perspective, it can be easier to step away. And you shouldn't go cold turkey, as that is a recipe for disaster, and people do, and it causes a lot of problems for the business and for your emotions and for your identity. That's so starting to step away. And I love what you said, Christy, just about your hobbies and your identity outside the business and keeping friends that are not in the industry and maintaining relationships. That's a big piece. And so when you step away, your whole identity isn't wrapped up in the business, but it's, I'm a person who also likes to do X, Y, and Z.
yeah.
And, you know, start to get on a nonprofit board or volunteer, or, you know, take Fridays off to go golfing. But I will say golf is not retirement. You'll be golfing and then you're going to get restless again. And that happens all the time.
Yes. Golf and grandkids are not sufficient. They're really great. But in general,
Exactly.
if we've just got the two G's going, we're a little concerned because we know that that's generally not enough for folks.
Exactly. Exactly. And you hear it a lot, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, I didn't pull golf and grandkids out of the ether.
Right. Right.
You know, we hear these things on the regular, and what we try to help people understand is that as much as you hate all the phone calls, all the emails, all the texts, worrying about this, worrying about that, problem solving and troubleshooting and all of that, when it goes away, there is an absence,
Mm-hmm.
and it is palpable,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
feels personal, and it feels like a personal reflection on your worth, your purpose, your identity, and your ability to contribute to something bigger than yourself. Your need to contribute to something bigger than
Mm-hmm.
yourself does not go away because you don't want to work in your business the way you've always been working in your business. It just means that you have to find other ways to express that creativity and that ingenuity, that curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And I often think if we can find other examples in our life of when we've done something that feels hard and remind ourselves that we have done it and done it successfully. So this isn't the first life transition you've probably gone through, right? We all did from high school, either into work life or into college life. Some of us got married. Some of us got married and had kids. Some people get divorced. Some people move out of state. There's rarely a person who can't point to some point in their life where they went from being known as X to being known as Y, or from having a role and purpose to that role and purpose changing. And
Mm-hmm.
so I encourage folks to reflect on those moments in their life, to say you've got this because you've done this before.
Mm-hmm.
You know what it's like to go from being a single person to a married person, from being childless to being a parent, and all those other, from renting to home owning. They seem like, oh well, these are just the normal things and I'm supposed to roll with it. Well, this is a normal transition too, and we just don't talk about how much what we do and who we do it for and the people we do it with, how much that influences our identity. And if the brass ring is making enough money so you don't have to work, you better know what you want to do with all that money and time when you don't have to do that.
Exactly. Exactly. And start doing it early, right?
Start doing it early. Start doing it early. And I don't think either of us are saying you should be prepared to come to a point in your life where you don't work anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I think what we're saying is you should be prepared to come to a point in your life where you don't want to work in the same way anymore.
Mm-hmm.
and that you can still derive meaning and purpose if your
Right.
work looks different.
Right. And where do you find that meaning and purpose?
Where
And
do you
that
find that meaning and purpose?
that doesn't go away, whether no matter what age you are, whether you're retired or still working, everybody needs a sense of fulfillment and needs that meaning and purpose. So how do you define that? And what does that look like? And start experimenting. I think that it's if you have that attitude of curiosity and experimenting and creativity, it's going to be a lot easier, I think, to explore, to not put all your eggs in one basket, but to be open-minded. Is it you always wanted to take a cooking class, but you didn't have the time because you were working, or learn a new language, or pick up an instrument? What are all those things that you thought, oh, someday I'll do this, and you put off? But think about it ahead of time, and what is going to be fulfilling for you.
Yes. And this is hard because all of this ties to recognizing our own mortality. And it
Mhm,
all is tied to recognizing that our ability, our physical, mental, emotional ability to do the things we love will change over time as well.
mhm,
And so the idea that I'll do all those things at a later date, when my age goes this way and my ability to do those things goes this way, or my wealth goes this way and my physical ability to do those things goes this way.
mhm,
I think having that candid conversation with yourself of you're not always going to be able to hike the Pyrenees. So if that's really what you want to do now, then we've got to carve out that business was built so that you'd have enough time and money and a
mhm.
team that could make sure it runs so you can go do that while you're physically able to do that. And those are just facing your own mortality and the mortality of the people you love. Because I know as a child, talking to my father about his illness and our business was intimately tied together with he's coming to the end of his life. And
Yeah, yeah.
he doesn't want to talk about that. And I don't particularly want to talk about that. And yet, acknowledging that that's where we are in this process meant that some conversations either were going to happen now or they weren't going to happen at all.
Mhm.
And that's, that can be really hard you begin then to grieve the person and and for my father, grieving his own identity while he's grieving the changes that are happening to him due to his illness and the end of
Right.
his life being closer for him. So
Mhm.
I get it. I get why it's hard.
Yeah, you've lived it. You've lived it, right?
Yeah, it's
From the side of the daughter, and what are we gonna do with the business, and what does he want, and watching him change. I was just talking to someone the other night about, grief doesn't wait for death. That's what I should say. Grief doesn't wait for death.
yeah, that's very true.
And in this case, the father has significant health and cognitive issues, and grieving the loss of who he was, and the dynamo, and all that
Hmm.
energy, and driving business forward. And so that's, it's another way that grief occurs in that next gen, as they need to be thinking of taking over the business or selling the business, or just how that shows up and how it impacts. We haven't really talked about this, but how it impacts culture and the other employees through
Mm,
these transitions. And I've seen employees that have worked with the company for 40, 50 years. And so they're also watching the person that they reported to all these years, and they helped grow the company
yes.
alongside. And the grief at that loss too. This could be their friend and partner, and
Mentor.
mentor. And do they want to really work for the kids that that they saw grow up through the business,
Yes.
so
Yes. And I even found that I was mourning parts of who I wanted my father to be, not just the
Mhm,
parts of that who he was and how those may have been changed or diminished, but as a child wanting to, having to also grieve the parts of what I had hoped he would be or wanted him or needed him to be, right? So you
mhm.
layer that all in, and that's even before he passed away, right? So then you're needing to do business while grieving, which we talked about before, is that's a challenge in and of itself. So
Yeah.
I think what we're really saying is for both sides is to, if you're experiencing trouble stepping away or trouble where someone has indicated that they're ready to step away but they have not,
Mhm.
that to dig a little deeper on this identity question and the grief around what it means to no longer be the owner or the president or the CEO or the founder, um, and delve into the feelings that are manifesting in behaviors that people may not even be aware are connected.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. And how do you support each other through the process? I think that the family members that are coming into that stage of running the company don't often think about the big emotional changes that are happening for that person who's getting ready to leave, and they don't realize that they can emotionally support this person. They might be so caught in their perspective of, I'm really frustrated that this person's been
Hmm.
talking about retirement for, they're going to retire in 5 years. And that was 15 years ago.
Yep.
And they're stuck in that. But what they could be doing is taking that person's perspective and, how do I help you move along? Because clearly there's a part of you that thinks you should. Um, they thought about retiring, but they're having trouble moving on. And yes, it is frustrating for you. And how can you help that person? How can you have those conversations around the emotions?
Yeah. The empathy and compassion that we're asked to bring for ourselves, but also for them. And to recognize how our own inability to make the transition that we've said we know needs to be made is also, we can feel empathy for the kids who are frustrated, as well as compassion for ourselves, that this is a lot harder than you thought it was, and maybe even that you thought it should be. And we put a lot of expectations on ourselves about how we should act and who we should be, and those can definitely influence who we are and how we show up. So I
Mhm.
think about some of the things we suggested. Experiment early with building purpose and meaning outside of your work life. Um, Talk candidly as a family early, often, about what it takes to be successful in this business, what individual expectations are, whether it's the parent of the child or the child of the parent, and the other iterations that can take. Um, Recognizing you have done hard things, hard transitions, identity transitions before, and drawing on those past experiences for strength. I think we've talked a lot about self-awareness, showing up as aware as possible about how your emotions are impacting this work, as well as how the emotions of others are. Um, what are some of the other ideas you would throw out to folks who are wrestling with this piece?
I would go back to the, like, making a plan early and objectively, and thinking about, as a whole in your company, what's your attitude towards succession and retirement and expectations and transitions, also bringing up the next gen, and thinking about it in totality of the company rather than specific people. So if you write policies and expectations ahead of time, it's easier to objectively put those in place, and for things to feel less personal. But that curiosity and experimentation piece, I think, is important, and looking at it as a group supportive event that you're helping both sides is important, rather than like one person is leaving and then this group, it can turn into a little bit of an us and them.
Yeah.
And really creating it as a whole, and looking at it as a whole, not just the parts.
Yeah, this is our transition and our company's transition, not
Yes.
dad or mom's or Uncle Jim's.
Mhm.
It's ours. I really like that. And I would also say that there are folks like Donna and myself
Yes.
who talk about these things all the time and work with business owners, whether they be with family members or non-family members, about what it means to plan for a successful succession, a successful exit, and really the successful transition from whatever role you currently hold to the role you want to have in the future. That ideally your business has been built to help you live this next phase of your life the way you want to, and on your own terms. So,
Yeah.
how do people generally get in touch with you, Donna, when they're like, we need to call in some help on this?
Yeah, well, you can obviously find me on LinkedIn under Dr. Donna Marino. Website is the same, and email is donna@drdonnamarino. And I will say that having a collaborative team is very helpful, just as you have the family and the business as a whole instead of parts. If you have a team that represents each of those parts, that's very helpful. That's where Christy and I work very well together, bringing the nuts and bolts as well as the more less obvious pieces of emotion and communication all together.
Absolutely. And I will say, for me, and I think this goes for you as well, you don't actually have to know what you need. You simply need to know that the thing you're grappling with, whether it's succession planning, exit planning, family dynamics within the business, being able to get the right people in the right seats, being able to grow with an aligned vision for the future, being able to preserve your legacy, whatever variation on these themes you might be grappling with, and you may not know who you need or what you need them for, but reaching out and starting those conversations with trusted advisors is a wonderful way to open up the door. And I know Donna and I align ourselves with attorneys and CPAs and wealth advisors and other professionals who take that same approach of, this is the whole company, the whole family. And we need to approach it in a way where we all understand what the goals are, and we're all moving in the same direction to help the company and the family be successful in achieving the outcomes that they want. That was one of the things you shared, of after you got through those one-on-ones and you come together and you have an agenda. Love having an agenda. You have an agenda focused on the desired outcomes and a shared vision for success. That if we can help you in any way, shape, or form get to the point where you're all working towards a common goal and wrestling with the emotions and the practical concerns and the business requirements and the financial requirements that go into achieving that shared vision, that's what we're here to help you do. So you can also find me at purposefirstadvisors.com, on LinkedIn, Christy Maxfield, or at Christy. Actually, that's not my email address. My email address is cmaxfield@purposefirstadvisors.com. And we would both love to hear from you, your thoughts on this topic, the things you might be grappling with in your business, and other ways grief might be impacting your workplace and your ability to run your business and achieve your goals. So thank you for being with us.
Yeah, thank you.